From the News Channel 5 Network, this is SportsLine.
Hey there, SportsLine on your television. Steve Lehman here with you. Glad you are here with us on this Tuesday night on News Channel 5. Plus, going to talk a bunch of football over the course of the next hour. The Titans on the practice fields again today. Their fourth practice, second day in a row in pads. And it was a good response from the offense. We talked about it a little bit last night that they didn't play very well yesterday. They were kind of sloppy, a lot of mistakes, a lot of penalties. Today they respond. Got back involved in the real competition that they've tried to create between the offense and the defense and between positions in this training camp as they try to put together the best 53-man roster out of the 90 guys who are ultimately there right now. So it was a very interesting day today in that regard, that it was the response that Mike Mularkey wanted. Some other observations that I've seen throughout training camp is I think you see the veteran presence on this team. DeMarco Murray in the backfield. He's been a guy who's really taken charge. He put a ball on the ground the other day in practice and immediately came back and said, look, that can't happen. I know it can't happen. It's not going to happen again. We're starting the drill over, and we're not putting anything on the ground. And he went out there, and they as a group did it better. Andre Johnson has come in and immediately become a leader in the wide receiver group. Now, an interesting thing about that is today Kendall Wright tweaked his hamstring, which is a concern a little bit in the sense that those things can linger and carry on for you throughout the course of the season. But for today, they just took it easy, took him out of practice. But what that meant is Rashard Matthews, the rookie Tajay Sharp, and Harry Douglas got a lot of the first-team reps today for the Titans, and all looked pretty good out there. Andre Johnson continues to look good as well, and so those guys have kind of created the four that have made the most plays, along with Wright up to this point. Dorial Green-Beckham had a terrible day on Sunday, but since then has come back and caught the football and been a weapon again. The guy that, to me, may be in trouble on this roster right now is Justin Hunter. Here's a guy that they traded up to get at the top of the second round a few years ago, but just has never been able to consistently perform. And, of course, he's had some injury issues as well. I haven't really seen him make a play yet in training camp, make anything more than the routine play. And when you're in the middle of a room that has a bunch of solid receivers, at some point you're going to have to make a play. And that's the thing for the Titans right now is they didn't have much production from that position last year, so they're looking for guys who can make plays, who will make catches consistently and don't give them the ups and downs that they've had of the last few years. I don't know if we've seen that from Justin Hunter yet. And here's one other guy to watch out for at the wide receiver position, Trey McBride. Not a guy that we often talk about at the wide receiver position. He hasn't played a ton or gotten a ton of reps there. But here's what he does that none of those guys I just mentioned do. He plays special teams. Trey McBride is a very good gunner on coverage teams. He was the kick returner last year. He's learning to be the punt returner, perhaps as a backup to Dexter McCluster this season. All of those things give him a leg up in the sense that none of those other receivers are going to be special teams players. It's just not in their makeup. It's not what they do. And when you start getting down to the bottom of the roster and who's your fifth or who's your sixth wide receiver to keep, having those couple of guys being able to contribute in more ways than just what they can do in catching the football is huge, because they're not going to catch the football that much. They're going to get a few reps a game at the wide receiver position. So having them be able to help you on special teams and be key contributors there is huge. The roster's not that big. And that's where Trey McBride, I think, is a guy that hasn't been talked about much. Nobody's really suggested him as a possible receiver when you talk about all the other guys. But to me, I don't even know if it's a dark horse. He is a guy that has strengths that the other guys can't put out there. And because of that, I think he has a real legitimate shot to make this football team. Some other things that I've seen is the offensive line is certainly a work in progress, but Jack Conklin is going to be good. 8th overall pick, you would hope he's going to be good, but I think he fits perfectly into what they're trying to do. I think he's been consistent, and the word Mike Mularkey used was steady. He described it as when you look at guys, especially young guys, the things that oftentimes stand out is the mistakes, the mental errors, the penalties, if they get beat consistently by a veteran guy because they just haven't learned all the tricks of the trade yet. Those sort of things generally stand out to you. There's been none of that so far with Jack Conklin. He has been steady. And that, again, is what the Titans are looking for, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Guys that continue to do their job, to show up and do just what's asked for them. Not necessarily more than that, but don't make mistakes. Don't hurt the football team. Just do your job. And to this point, Jack Conklin has done his job. And I would say that he's ahead of schedule for a guy who's just had 4 NFL training camp practices, only 2 practices in the National Football League with pads on. On the defensive side of the ball, the defensive line continues to impress, and I think the linebacking core now is as deep as we've seen it in some time here in Tennessee. That 3-4 transition, I think, is fully taken hold. They have depth up front. They have several guys that they can run at you. Jarrell Casey, of course, leading that charge, but Al Woods, Daquan Jones, Angelo Blackson, Austin Johnson, the draft pick this year. There's a bunch of bodies up front that they feel good about. Another guy we oftentimes forget about is Carl Klug. Nobody really talks about Carl Klug, but that guy's a football player. He had several nice plays, several nice moves again today. Those guys are going to continue to show up, and they can come in waves at you now. And that's what the linebacking core can do as well. Wesley Woodyard coming off a good year. Avery Williamson with 137 tackles last year. You feel good about them. You feel good about a healthy Brian Arakpo and Derek Morgan. And now you've got some extra bodies on the outside. Kevin Dodd, of course, still has not practiced for this team. They hope maybe by the end of the week he might be able to get back on the practice field and off of the physically unable to perform list. DeAndres Mount has evolved, grown up to be a guy that I think they believe can get out there on the field. David Bass seems to just continue to show up around the football. That's important. That's important stuff. And so I think that front 7 of the defense is going to set the tone for the defense this year. And they have the ability, and they'll tell you themselves, they believe they have the ability to be a top defense in the NFL this year, a top unit up front in the NFL. But they also understand that you can't just talk about it. You've got to be able to go out and do it and work for it. And that's what they're trying to do right now in training camp. Some other news in the NFL today. Tyrann Mathieu, the great safety of the Arizona Cardinals, gets a new contract extension. Of course, he was out in the playoffs last year when they were beaten by Carolina. Tore his ACL. He's back healthy and ready to go, and now he gets rewarded. 5 years, $62.5 million, 42 of that guaranteed. Huge contract. The guaranteed money there is the most ever given to a safety. So that tells you what the Cardinals think about Tyrann Mathieu and what he can do for that defense. That defensive backfield is very good in Arizona, and he's a big part of it, him and Patrick Peterson. So there's some news from around the league today. College football, Tennessee on the field last night in Knoxville. They continue practice today over there on Rocky Top. Vanderbilt, Middle Tennessee, both spoke today, had their preseason media day with players. The rest of the teams report tonight, tomorrow, and then on the field in both instances Thursday. to get the season underway. Western Kentucky following a similar schedule. They'll talk on their media day tomorrow up in Bowling Green. So college football certainly coming as well. Less than a month away now from kickoff of the college football season. And there's a lot to talk about around these parts. Tennessee, of course, the pick in the SEC East. We talked a little bit about that last night and the fact that they're embracing the expectations. A little different story at Vanderbilt, where Derek Mason said today that he was on a flight recently and he flipped open the paper. And in it was a ranking of all 128 FBS Bowl subdivision football teams. Vanderbilt was ranked 113th of the 128. I think that's crazy, that ranking. I don't see how any Power 5 team, with the exception of maybe Kansas, could be below the 100 level. I just don't see how that would happen. But Vanderbilt's not that bad. Vanderbilt has a very good defense that will give them a chance and, frankly, win them some games this year. I'm very confident in saying that. They have a quality running back in Ralph Webb. They have an offensive line that should be much improved if they can stay healthy with Will Holden and Andrew Jelks back for that offensive line. And this year, for the first time under Derek Mason, they've got a quarterback and Kyle Shermer. So to me, 113th is just nuts. They're not that. They're also not a championship team. You know, they're somewhere in the middle there, but they're definitely not 113. But Derek Mason talked about how he took that as complete disrespect for himself, for his program, and what these guys are trying to do over there on West End. And you better believe he shared that anecdote with them. How's that for a little motivation as you get set to go through the grueling time of fall camp to get ready for that first game? And that's the other thing, too. Vanderbilt, unlike a lot of teams, is starting with an SEC game. Not just a good game to start the season, but they're starting with a conference game to start the season against South Carolina. And Mason said today he likes that approach, because for this team that has something to prove, that has a chip on its shoulder, they get to go out and prove it in week one. You get a win against South Carolina on that opening Thursday night, and you are 1-0 in the SEC. You're in first place by yourself 1 week into the year, and you just get the season rolling. And as you look at it, South Carolina and Vanderbilt are teams that are picked in the bottom half of the East Division. So you'd have to call them borderline bowl teams. How big does that make that game? Because if you get that win, you're a step closer. You're on your way to a positive season. I think Derek Mason and the Commodores embrace the schedule in front of them, the work that they have to do this month, the opportunity to start the college football season on September 1st, that Thursday night, national TV, in a conference game against a rival in your division, and get off to the right foot. And they believe that they will do that, even if nobody else does. Middle Tennessee, of course, the pick in the Conference USA East Division, just in front of Western Kentucky. There's some pressure on the Blue Raiders. They've got a lot of guys back. They had a quality season last year, but they're expected to take the next step this year with Brent Stockstill, quarterback, and Richie James, the dynamic pass-catching wide receiver, part of that great aerial duo. Itavius Mathers, transfer from Ole Miss, kid who was a star at Blackman. He's going to be key in a lot of ways for them this year, for me. Last year, if you wanted to point to a weakness for Middle Tennessee, it was their inability to run the football consistently. They could throw it through the air a ton with Baptiste and James. But now with Baptiste gone, people will be able to focus more on James if you can't keep them honest with the running game. And that's what they really weren't able to do last year, is run the ball consistently. This year, Can that offensive line be better? And can Itavius Mathers be a consistent threat in the running game for Middle Tennessee? That's going to be important if they're going to live up to those expectations, win the division, and have a chance at the Conference USA title. Phone lines are open tonight, 737-7767. We want to hear from you. Your thoughts, Titans training camp. They're through their first 4 days of practice. They've had the pads on for a couple days. If you've been out there, I want to hear from you. What have your impressions been? You heard some of mine. Questions about the upcoming season, comments about the upcoming season, and also college football as well. What are you looking forward to? Who are you backing this year? Do you think Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, can live up to the hype? Can Vanderbilt be a surprise? What else are you looking forward to? Again, the phone line is 737-7767. Wide open bank of numbers for you right now to call in and be a part of the show. We'll come back, get to your phone calls, and much more after this. You're watching SportsLine on News Channel 5+.